every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. There is a specific hue of blue that belongs to the exhumas. It is a crystalline electric sapphire that suggests purity, exclusivity, and a detachment from the mundane struggles of the mainland. In late 2016, that color became the primary weapon in a psychological assault launched against the disposable income of the American millennial elite. It was a weaponization of aesthetics, a promise that if you paid enough money, you could transcend your reality and step into a curated, filtered existence. The result was the Fyre Festival. To the public, Fyre Festival is remembered as a punchline. It is the story of wealthy influencers stranded in disaster relief tents, eating cheese sandwiches in styrofoam containers, and fighting over damp mattresses. It is often framed as a comedy of errors, a chaotic collision of incompetence and hubris. But to view it simply as a party that went wrong is to miss the darker, more intricate machinery beneath the surface. Today, we are not just looking at a failed music festival. We are dissecting the anatomy of a 21st century confidence game. This is a case study in how the digital economy of influence can be manipulated to override logic, how the fear of missing out was industrialized into a multi-million-dollar fraud, and how a 25-year-old entrepreneur named Billy McFarland managed to sell a vision so potent that it blinded investors, employees, and thousands of customers to the glaring reality that the product did not exist. We are analyzing the architecture of the lie. We will look at the falsified revenue sheets, the circular financing, the exploitation of local Bahamian labor, and the specific sociopathic traits required to maintain a facade while the world burns down around you. This was not an accident. It was an inevitable collision of unchecked capitalism and the influencer economy. Today, we dissect the anatomy of a viral mirage. To understand the architecture of the Fyre Festival, we must first understand its architect, William "Billy" McFarland. Born in 1991, McFarland grew up in Short Hills, New Jersey, an affluent suburb that serves as a quiet enclave for New York City's financial elite. From a young age, McFarland displayed a proficiency for computer engineering and a precocious understanding of how value is perceived. He did not invent products so much as he invented access. Before Fyre, there was Magnesis. Founded in 2013, Magnesis was a membership-based club card targeted at millennials who wanted the status of an American Express Black Card, but lacked the credit history or income to qualify for one. For $250 a year, members received a heavy black metal card that was effectively a clone of their existing debit card, but with a magnetic strip that allowed them access to a townhouse in the West Village and alleged discounts at trendy restaurants. The anatomy of the Magnesis scheme is crucial because it served as the beta test for Fyre. Magnesis was built on the concept of social proof. The card itself offered no intrinsic financial utility. Its value was entirely performative. It was a prop that allowed the user to signal status. McFarland understood that for a certain demographic, the appearance of wealth was just as valuable, if not more so, than wealth itself. However, Magnesis was bleeding money. The perks cost far more to provide than the membership fees covered. To keep the lights on, McFarland began engaging in a practice that would become his trademark: overselling and underdelivering, while using new investor money to plug the holes left by previous operational failures. He was selling the future to pay for the past. It was here that he met a young rapper and aspiring tech mogul named Jeffrey Atkins, better known as Ja Rule. The partnership between McFarland and Ja Rule was the catalyst for Fyre. In 2016, they conceived of an app that would allow users to book music talent directly, Uberizing the booking industry. It was a disruptive idea, but like many tech startups, it needed a marketing event to launch it into the stratosphere. They needed a moment that would define the brand. They decided to throw a festival. The initial premise was seductive in its simplicity. They would find a private island in the Bahamas, fill it with models, alcohol, and top-tier musical acts, and sell the experience to the highest bidders. They secured a lease on a parcel of land on Norman's Cay. This location is significant to our forensic analysis of the marketing narrative. Norman's Cay was famously the headquarters of the Medellin cartel's smuggling operations in the late 70s and early 80s, run by Carlos Leder. McFarland and his team leaned heavily into this illicit history. They marketed the festival as taking place on Pablo Escobar's private island, despite the fact that Escobar never actually owned it. This detail is the first major red flag in the anatomy of the fraud. It demonstrates a willingness to prioritize a compelling narrative over factual reality. The allure of the outlaw lifestyle, sanitized for the Instagram generation, was the hook. In December 2016, McFarland, Ja Rule, and a small army of supermodels flew to Norman's Cay to shoot the promotional video. This video is perhaps the most critical piece of evidence in the entire case. It was the artifact that launched the scam. The footage showed models like Bella Hadid, Hailey Bieber, and Emily Ratajkowski swimming in pristine waters, riding jet skis, and partying on yachts. It was a masterfully edited montage of hedonism and beauty. The anatomy of this promotional video deserves close scrutiny. It promised an experience that was physically impossible to deliver at the price point they were asking, in the timeline they had established. But the video was not selling a concert, it was selling proximity. The implicit promise was that if you bought a ticket, you wouldn't just be watching these women, you would be partying with them. You would be inside the circle. On December 12, 2016, the trap was sprung. In a coordinated marketing strike, hundreds of influencers, fire starters, simultaneously posted a plain orange square to their Instagram feeds. The cryptic image was accompanied by a link to the website and the hashtag Fyre Festival. The saturation was absolute. For 48 hours, if you were between the ages of 18 and 35 and followed any major pop culture figures, your feed was dominated by the orange tile. This utilization of the orange square is a case study in viral engineering. It bypassed the need for information. It created a void that the consumer filled with their own imagination. The mystery generated the hype. The website went live, offering ticket packages ranging from $1,200 to over $100,000 for VIP villas. The money began to pour in. But this is where the anatomy of the fraud shifts from marketing to logistics, and where the criminal negligence begins to compound. The team had sold thousands of tickets for an event scheduled for late April 2017. That gave them less than 5 months to build a city from scratch on a remote island with no infrastructure. Veteran event producers will tell you that planning a festival of this magnitude requires at least 12 to 18 months. McFarland was attempting to do it in 4. He hired experienced professionals, but he systematically ignored their warnings. When a pilot and consultant named Keith van der Linde told McFarland that the site on Norman's Cay could not handle the sewage capacity for thousands of people, suggesting they would need a ship to process the waste, McFarland dismissed him. The situation on the ground deteriorated rapidly. The owners of Norman's Cay, realizing that McFarland was using the Pablo Escobar connection in his marketing in direct violation of their lease agreement, canceled the contract. Suddenly, Fyre Festival had sold thousands of tickets for a private island they no longer had access to. This was the point of no return. A rational actor, or at least a legally compliant one, would have canceled the event, issued refunds, and declared bankruptcy. McFarland did the opposite. He doubled down. He secured a new site on Great Exuma, a much larger populated island. The location was a plot of land at Roker Point, situated just north of the Sandals Emerald Bay Resort. The shift to Roker Point destroyed the core promise of the festival. It was not a private island. It was an undeveloped tract of land, essentially next to a highway. To hide this, McFarland ordered his team to map out the site in a way that obscured the neighbors. He continued to market the event as a private island experience. This is a critical pivot in the anatomy of the crime. At this stage, it moved from ambitious incompetence to active fraud. McFarland knew the product he was selling, seclusion and exclusivity, was no longer possible, yet he continued to sell it. The logistical reality at Roker Point was a nightmare. The site was covered in scrub and gravel. There was no water, no power, and no sewage system. McFarland brought in a new production team, but they were hamstrung by a lack of funds. Despite the millions coming in from ticket sales, money was evaporating. McFarland was burning cash on private jets, lavish dinners, and the renting of a massive office in Tribeca. To keep the operation afloat, McFarland engaged in wire fraud. He doctored revenue sheets, inflating his company's holdings to secure millions of dollars in loans from unsuspecting investors. He told one investor that Fyre Media was worth $90 million. He showed documents claiming he had booked millions in talent. He even digitally altered a stock ownership statement to make it appear as though he owned shares in Facebook worth over $2 million. These were not exaggerations. They were forgeries. As the clock ticked down to April, the desperation on Great Exuma grew. The luxury villas that had been sold to VIP guests did not exist. Instead, the team purchased hundreds of disaster relief tents. Leftover stock from Hurricane Matthew, these were stark white geodesic domes. In a panic to make them look luxury, they simply planned to leave them unfurnished or throw in a mattress. The most infamous anecdote from this period involves Andy King, a seasoned event producer who was one of the few adults in the room. The festival needed to import water, specifically Evian water, to satisfy the customs requirements and the brand image, but the shipment was stuck in customs, with a bill of $175,000 that Fyre could not pay. McFarland called King and asked him to go to the head of customs and offer a sexual favor in exchange for releasing the water. King, fully indoctrinated into the cult of saving the festival, actually showered, drank mouthwash, and drove to the meeting prepared to do it. The official simply asked for the payment to be made later, but the fact that McFarland made the request and King considered it illustrates the toxic psychological hold McFarland had over his team. Let us pause to analyze the role of the local Bahamians. This is often the overlooked tragedy of the Fyre Festival. McFarland employed hundreds of locals, construction workers, cooks, drivers, cleaners. These were men and women who worked around the clock day and night to try and clear the land and build the stage. Marianne Rowell, the owner of the Exuma Point Bar and Grill, was contracted to provide catering. She spent $50,000 of her own savings to buy ingredients and pay her staff, trusting that McFarland would reimburse her. He never did. The anatomy of this crime includes the financial devastation of a local economy that could ill afford the hit. 2 days before the festival, a massive storm system moved over the Exumas. The rain lashed the site at Roker Point. The ground turned to mud. The mattresses inside the disaster relief tents, which had been left outside or in unsealed tents, were soaked. The site was a ruin. It was uninhabitable. Yet, on the morning of April 27, 2017, the first charter flights took off from Miami. This decision to let the planes leave is perhaps the most criminally negligent act of the entire saga. McFarland and his team knew there was no housing, no food, and no water infrastructure ready. They knew the site was a disaster area, but they boarded the passengers anyway. The arrival was chaotic. Guests were shuttled from the airport to a beach party at a local restaurant to keep them away from the site while workers frantically tried to set up tents. The guests were given cheap tequila and kept waiting for hours. As the sun began to set, the alcohol wore off, and the mood shifted from excitement to confusion, and then to dread. When the buses finally took them to the site, the reality hit. There were no villas. There were rows of wet, white tents. There was no lighting. There was no concierge. The gourmet cuisine that had been promised, advertised as being curated by celebrity chef Steven Starr, was revealed to be 2 slices of cheese on wheat bread, served in a styrofoam container with a side salad. The photo of that cheese sandwich, posted to Twitter by a guest named Trevor DeHaas, went viral instantly. It was the image that pierced the bubble. It was the visual antithesis of the orange square. In one low-resolution image, the fraud was exposed to the world. Chaos ensued at the campsite. As night fell, it became a free-for-all. Guests began tearing open tents to claim them. There was no security. Luggage was thrown out of the back of a shipping container into an unlit pile, leading to theft and fighting. Wild dogs were roaming the perimeter. People were crying, screaming, and wandering in the dark. It was Lord of the Flies with Instagram models. McFarland, sensing the collapse, retreated. He and his inner circle holed up in a private house nearby, while the guests were left to fend for themselves. The next morning, the evacuation began. But even that was a disaster. Guests were herded back to the tiny Exuma International Airport, where they were locked inside the terminal for hours without food or water. The plane that was supposed to take them home was delayed. Inside the terminal, the heat rose, and panic set in. One guest fainted. It was a hostage situation created by incompetence. The festival was officially canceled. The fallout was immediate. As the guests landed back in Miami, the lawsuits began to fly. But the anatomy of the crime was not yet complete. The FBI launched an investigation. They looked past the disastrous party and into the finances. What they found was a Ponzi scheme. McFarland had been using money from ticket pre-sales to pay off early investors, and using fresh investment money to pay for the festival operations. While skimming cash for himself, he had lied to everyone: the investors, the ticket holders, the employees, and the government. In June 2017, Billy McFarland was arrested and charged with wire fraud. He was released on bail, confined to his parents' home in New Jersey, and this is where the story takes a turn that reveals the true pathology of the con artist. While out on bail, facing decades in federal prison, McFarland started a new scam. He obtained the email list of the Fyre Festival ticket buyers, the very people he had just defrauded. He created a new company called NYC VIP Access. He began emailing these victims, offering them exclusive access to events like the Met Gala, Burning Man, and Coachella. He claimed to have tickets that were impossible to get. It was a lie. He had no tickets. He was simply trying to extract more cash from the same pool of victims to pay his legal fees and maintain his lifestyle. He was selling air. He generated roughly $100,000 from this bail period scam before he was caught again. This brazen act cemented his psychological profile for the prosecutors. He was not a misguided dreamer. He was a compulsive fraudster who could not stop. In October 2018, Billy McFarland was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. He was ordered to forfeit $26 million. Ja Rule, who had famously toasted to the festival saying, "Here's to living like movie stars, partying like rock stars, and fucking like porn stars," managed to avoid criminal charges, with his lawyers successfully arguing that he was merely a promoter and not involved in the financial fraud, though he faced numerous civil suits. The anatomy of the Fyre Festival is a reflection of the era in which it occurred. It exploited a specific vulnerability in the millennial psyche, the need for validation through curation. McFarland understood that we live in an economy where the image of the thing is more valuable than the thing itself. He sold a JPEG of a lifestyle. The investors were blinded by the proximity to fame. They saw the influencers and assumed diligence had been done. The influencers were blinded by the money and the free trip. They posted the orange square without asking questions, lending their credibility to a vacuum. The customers were blinded by the fear of missing out. They transferred thousands of dollars to a bank account based on a promise made in a 30-second video. We must also consider the role of social media platforms in this anatomy. Instagram provided the infrastructure for the contagion. The algorithm rewarded the aesthetic, amplifying the lie while suppressing the reality. The feedback loop was hermetically sealed. Dissenting voices or questions about the logistics were deleted from the Fyre comments sections, creating a sanitized echo chamber of hype. The legacy of Fyre is multifaceted. It changed the way influencer marketing is regulated, forcing more transparency in paid partnerships. It served as a reality check for the drop culture model of sales, and it destroyed the trust that is the currency of the event industry. But perhaps the most disturbing element of the anatomy is how close it came to working. Not the festival itself, but the money grab. If McFarland had simply scaled back, if he had held a mediocre party on a beach in Miami instead of promising a private island, he might have gotten away with it. The fraud failed because the lie was too big to be contained by the physical world. Physics and logistics are the ultimate fact-checkers. As we conclude this dissection, we are left with the image of the empty champagne bottles littering the gravel at Roker Point, the wind whipping through the torn flaps of the disaster tents. The Fyre Festival was a monument to the hollowness of hype. It was a scam that could only exist in a world where we are willing to pay any price to prove to strangers that we are living a life we do not have. Billy McFarland served his time and was released in 2022. Almost immediately, he began teasing a new venture, Fyre Festival 2. He claims to have sold out the first drop of tickets. The anatomy of the con, it seems, is cyclical. The predator evolves, but the hunger of the prey remains the same. We want to believe in the blue water. We want to believe in the exclusive island. And as long as we want to believe, there will always be someone waiting to sell us a ticket to nowhere. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.